As an executive coach, I often get requests to support clients around some very specific areas, especially ones that the organisation have sort of identified with them. So as an example, I'll do a lot of work with leaders making a transition from maybe where they've been leading sort of functional teams at a sort of a country level. Maybe they're moving now into more of an international sort of role where they're leading much larger extended teams of people. And you find that one of the sort of trade-offs as you move up into these very senior roles is that you sort of give up a lot of control, so sort of day-to-day management, your focus being on this sort of on the detail, to actually much more about wider influence. So you sacrifice control, you get influence, you get more scale, but inevitably the leadership sort of attribute that you need to start to build more is this ability to empower your people. And leaders can often struggle with this concept of empowerment. And so I find myself doing quite a lot of work really from a coaching perspective, but sometimes from a sort of advisory and a sort of mentoring perspective. So when we think about empowerment, what do we mean by empowerment? Well, empowerment is really about giving more accountability to people. So my sense is you have to empower with accountability. There is no empowerment unless there's accountability. And that means sometimes people don't actually like to be empowered. Not everyone likes to be empowered, because if you're empowered, you are suddenly becoming more accountable. It's very, very important leaders understand that, because that will give them a sort of sense of security. Okay, I'm empowering everyone, but I'm also ensuring then that they understand there's accountability. And there's a skill set there in leaders to say, okay, and not only can I just extend some kind of trust to you, I've got to ensure accountability. I've got to make sure that the safeguards are in place, there are checks and balances, and the person understands that I'm making them accountable for these things, and that's that process of empowerment. So delegation is an example. What are you delegating? You're delegating the accountability. The delegation is the process of empowering people. Now, you clearly can delegate badly, you can delegate well. So how you empower people, how you make people accountable, really critical. So often when I work with clients, we get to the point where it's not necessarily the process, it's not the idea of empowerment and accountability that's the issue. It really is then building the skill set around how do you do that effectively. And obviously that's very contextual, depending on what is it that you're empowering and who are you empowering. It requires some thought. So there's a real skill around empowerment. I guess what you want to think about really as a leader is, okay, what are the risks? Because effectively it tends to trigger some concerns and some worry in both the person who's empowering others, but also the people who are now being held accountable. So generally people will go for a process to think about, okay, is this person capable? Before I start to empower people, what's the level of capability in the team or the person that I'm about to empower? And how do I make sure they're as capable as possible? And capability is something that we keep building. Also, you need to address, are they even willing? So again, empowerment only works if the other person accepts that accountability. So working on this idea of skill and will are really important. And I think as a leader, you also have to be recognized that when you empower people, you're still responsible. So I always say you can extend accountability to people, but you ultimately as a leader still remain responsible. And that means then you need to be really in it with them and be there to support and guide them. So if you are an empowering leader, there's a very good chance you're a trusting leader, and there's a very high probability you're a leader that's very focused on people's development. I'm often sitting in meetings or on calls with leaders, and I say, okay, you're fully empowered to do this. Just go and figure it out. And really, that's not good enough. Empowering people and saying, well, just go figure it out. You need to stay with them. You need to support them in terms of their development. You should be checking in with them. And really then you can evolve into maybe more of a coaching, mentoring sort of style, but you can't just abdicate all responsibility and say, well, I've empowered you now, go figure it out. And some leaders who are new to empowerment, I think, make this fatal mistake. And for teams, it's very difficult to challenge back. Once you've been sort of empowered, people can go in and grumble and say, oh my goodness, they've just abdicated all this responsibility to me. Leaders should always retain responsibility. As a leader, you can't, I was all taught in the army, you can't delegate responsibility. You're ultimately responsible, but you can delegate, you can empower with accountability. So my work with leaders really is to help them understand how they can do that in a skillful way, how can they address the risks that are involved in that, and how can they make sure that it's a positive process, because we do know that leaders who can empower will build the capacity and the capability of their teams. It will create a high trust environment, and generally that's one of the hallmarks of a high performing team. So empowerment is really important, but as long as it's done in the most effective and sort of useful way.